fair, because I do think their run game and their offense as a whole is different because they become a little bit more reliant on number 18 when number 32 is not a focal point of the offense.
Is it, last year even the loser got into the playoffs. Much like in the SEC, it sort of sucks that the 11-0 loser in this game is not going to be in the playoffs, but it would take a chaotic final 2 weeks for that to happen, right? It's going to suck that the loser of the Ohio State-Michigan game is going to be left out.
I know, and what would really suck is that a team that can barely score 13 points a game is actually going to be playing in the championship game.
That's right.
I mean, right now, just hand Phil Parker, the defensive coordinator at Iowa, the Broyles Award. I mean, that defense is single-handedly saving that entire organization. It's unbelievable to watch how that team has somehow amassed 9 wins. I don't know if it's reflective of how good a job they've done or just reflective of how bad the Big Ten, particularly West, is. But that team's going to be playing for a championship, and the loser of Ohio State and Michigan won't be. And, yeah, it's got to be frustrating. And I think your only hope is whoever's the loser of the Ohio State-Michigan game, that it's a 39-36 barn burner at the last second, and to maybe give the committee something to consider if chaos happened elsewhere for that team that doesn't play in the championship game.
The show being brought to you by our friends at Blakely's Bouquets, Blakely'sBouquets.com, right there in Homewood, historic Homewood. Just absolutely the best people in the world, best humans in the world, that if you need flowers this holiday season to, sort of set on the Thanksgiving table or to decorate during the Christmas season, you can order them right there at Blakely's Bouquets, Blakely'sBouquets.com, 205-579-4900, 205-579-4900, or in person at the Full Service Flower Shop on Oxmoor Road. It's Blakely's Bouquet, just a great place to swing by and pick up your flowers year-round. Before we talk Iron Bowl, may I quickly just bounce around a couple other observations and get your quick reactions. Everyone thought Chip Kelly is getting fired at UCLA, just waiting for it to happen. And then they beat USC 38-20. Now USC is 7-5. Their season is done, and it looks like Caleb Williams' career is done at USC, and Chip Kelly's got one more game at UCLA at least. First off, your thoughts on USC, where they are, and then on Chip Kelly, should he keep his job? Let's go USC first.
I think USC is in big trouble. I think they're in big trouble long term. Have you looked at their Big Ten schedule next year?
Yes.
I mean, it is brutal. Plus LSU and Notre Dame out of conference. With that defense and who they're playing with personnel-wise, who they are in the offensive line, they're looking at a 4-8, potential 3-9 type of season without Caleb Williams. They're so devoid of talent on the defensive side of the ball. They've got no ability up front to play effective defense or to match up with top-level Big Ten teams or top-level SEC teams or a Texas. They can't match up with Oregon and Washington and Utah in their own conference, or even Oregon State up front. This is, I think, a really interesting situation for Lincoln Riley because, he was hired and brought in there to resurrect this program and return them to glory. But in order to do that, it has to be in every facet of the program. It can't just be on offense. It can't just be at quarterback. It can't just be with their skill. This was a team, I said this 100 times a year ago, was no different on defense than they are now. The only difference was they were plus 22 in turnover margin. You know what SC is this year? -3. So you take that defense without getting the extra possessions because of turnovers, and with Caleb Williams pretty much having to do it all, he can't save them anymore. And so if you remove Caleb Williams, you still have the same players, and you're moving into the Big Ten schedule. What's the answer for Lincoln Riley? There's a new athletic director that did not sign him to that contract that has come over. You have to ask yourself the question, where do they go from here on defense? How can they recruit to a level that an SC should be able to recruit on the defensive side of the ball, because they haven't done that in 2 cycles either? Got great skill, unbelievable skill. And so I think I saw a tweet this past weekend during the course of that game, of which I was on the sideline, that said, is the wrong coach on the hot seat in this matchup. And let's transition to UCLA, Jim. I don't think his job was ever in jeopardy going into this game. I certainly don't think it's in jeopardy at the conclusion of the season. He's now, I think, 24-12 in 2 years. He's on the verge of having a 9-win season. They had to play with their third and fourth string quarterback on multiple occasions this year, including against Arizona and Arizona State. The Arizona State game is probably unforgivable in terms of how they performed. But then all of a sudden they got their quarterback back and go out and throttle USC on Saturday, and it was a no contest. So I think they're going to be fine, and Chip Kelly is going to be fine going forward. But there are some real serious, fair questions. Off of that weekend, Jim, USC was 11-1, and ever since the loss to, I believe, Utah in the Pac-12 championship game, Lincoln Riley's record is 7-7 at USC. That's not what anybody thought would be the case when he got hired.
Lane Kiffin was in 2012 7-6. Started the year off at number 1, finished 7-6, and we all know about Tarmax and Lane Kiffin in USC. Lincoln Riley has a big buyout and nowhere near that right now. Okay, to the Iron Bowl we go. This is Monday Morning Live with Tom Luganville. I'm Jim Dunaway, mybookie.ag. Promo code next round, 50% deposit bonus. 50% deposit bonus at mybookie.ag. Iron Bowl this weekend, and everyone will look at Auburn losing to New Mexico State and just blow this off. I don't think that's the case. Give me one thing Auburn has to do to stay in this game with Alabama to make it competitive at Jordan-Hare Stadium. First thing they've got to do against Bama is what?
Quarterback run game wrinkle. Even though they have settled, obviously, on Peyton Thorne predominantly, Jaquez Hunter has become the premier runner. And going into this last week's game, it looked like they really had created that competitive balance between run to throw, and they weren't solely reliant on a rotation at quarterback and their entire run game coming from the quarterback position. I'm not saying they go back to all of that. What I'm saying is that everything that gives everybody problems in college football on defense is when they have to defend a player running the football at the quarterback position. And I think Auburn's going to have some of that. I'm not saying it's got to be the predominant portion of how they attack Alabama, but they can't allow Alabama to play defense without having to acknowledge the quarterback as a runner. That's priority number one for me. Because aside from that, if you took that away, Jim, Auburn is not good enough to just line up, in my opinion, as good as they've been on defense. I don't think they're good enough to just line up and stop the traditional run. Auburn's not good enough to line up and just run it at Alabama. Alabama will handle, I think, Auburn's front. And then, if you force them to be one-dimensional in the passing game where, everything's downfield and the pocket's not being moved and you're not having to worry about the quarterback scrambling and moving around, that plays into the hands of Alabama. So there's got to be some of that stuff that keeps Alabama defensively on their heels.
Pete writes in on Twitter. He wants to know 4 teams, regardless of record, your eye test. Is Alabama one of the 4 better teams? 4 best teams in the country?
Yes, absolutely. I was asked this question last week. We did a segment on College Football Live about it, and it was basically an eye test top 4. Didn't matter who played who. Doesn't matter what the record is. Who are the best-looking football teams right now? And I said at that time, that was last week, I said in some order, Georgia, Michigan, Alabama, and Oregon. And then I had Texas in the conversation right there. I know the head-to-head, but that wasn't the question that was asked. It was right now, right? And I probably would say the same 4 potentially this week. But that's not the only criteria that this committee is going to go by. But I do think as we head into the later weeks, these last couple of weeks, championship weekend, the committee does start to really get a feel for how somebody's playing like right now. Are you peaking and hot at the right time?
What's Alabama doing right going into this Auburn game? Is it just all? I mean, back to where they were to now. Is it just all the improvement of Milroe? Is it a combination of Milroe's improvement and Tommy Rees's improvement as a play caller? Is it the receivers have gotten better? The offensive line has gotten better? Is it all of the above? Tell me the things Alabama's gotten better at since that second half letdown against Texas.
I think it's all of the above, but if I were to nitpick and pull one thing out that I think has had the greatest impact on all of those developmental things improving, it's been Tommy Rees somehow getting Jalen Milroe to make quicker, more decisive decisions with the football. Now, when you say, well, how does that affect the other areas? Well, number one, have you noticed we're not overly critical of the offensive line with Alabama anymore? That's not to say the offensive line hasn't improved. They have. But when Jalen Milroe is not holding onto the ball and moving himself into pressures and into sacks by doing what? Being decisive and getting the ball out of his hand. When the first read or the priority read is right there, and it's there, all of a sudden the clock's going off, and Jalen Milroe's taking it and getting the ball out of his hand. So now all of a sudden the skill guys look better because the skill guys have the ball in space, and they're probably better than the opposition. So now the wideouts look better, right? It's this trickle-down effect that I think decision-making and the timing and anticipation and the rhythm of that decision-making that was really lacking, I would probably say up until maybe the game I had, the Arkansas game in Tuscaloosa. Coming out of that game is where I think we really kind of saw a shift in Jalen Milroe making a concerted effort to do better things in that regard. And as a result, everything else is kind of coming together because he's not putting them in negative situations.
RTR 18 Forever says, if I can rub a genie's bottle, I think is what he means here. If he can make a wish, we'll put it that way. Mm-hmm. Which one loss can I make one of my wishes to help Alabama's playoff, as I try to surmise what he's saying here? If he can wish for one loss that helps Alabama's case to make the playoffs, which team needs to lose the most?
I think it's Texas, because you need the Big 12's champ to be out of it, which would then provide an opportunity for, if an Alabama were to beat Georgia, to have two SEC teams in with the Pac-12 and the Big Ten champ, potentially, and then obviously you've got Florida State and what happens with them. So again, I think it's probably Texas with the injury that's happened to Florida State. I think a loss with Florida State, even if they were an ACC champ, given the current position of the team and how that would be viewed with no Jordan Travis, could really help Alabama.
Tom Luginbill with us on Monday Morning Live. We've got about 9 minutes to go here. Always brought to you by our friends at MyBookie. MyBookie.ag. MyBookie.ag. Promo code next round gets you into that. It is Iron Bowl week coming up. That, of course, is 2:30 Saturday. We get the Egg Bowl on Thursday night in SEC play. Ole Miss and Mississippi State. In that contest, Ole Miss will be going for their 10th win of the season. Lane Kiffin long term. People are starting to say maybe he's in the mix at Texas A&M or somewhere else. But here he goes with a 10-win season, a chance possibly at an outside chance at a New Year's Six Bowl game or another good bowl game for Ole Miss. What's Lane Kiffin's future? Is it in Oxford or somewhere else?
Well, I think you have to ask one serious question when you have this conversation, and it's a topic that has been brought up multiple times by Lane Kiffin himself, and that is, in today's college football climate, what are your resources afforded to you institutionally and from your backing and your boosters and your alumni and your collective and all of that stuff? Are you at a level where you can compete to beat Alabama, or to consistently beat Georgia, or consistently beat LSU when they're at the top? So you have to ask yourself the question, if there's an opportunity out there. I'm not saying that there is, and there may not be for Lane Kiffin as it relates to a program like Texas A&M. But the answer to that question is Texas A&M has a lot of those things that maybe Ole Miss currently doesn't have. Not that they don't have all of it, but maybe not to the level that you'd like to have to truly be able to compete on that level. So in today's world, can you be a 10-win team in the SEC West? Yeah, probably, if your quarterback's hitting right, you're playing decent defense, and you've got a premier guy at running back like Ole Miss has. Can you truly compete to outpace an Alabama or a Georgia if you're not on par with their resources? Probably not. And so how attractive would that opportunity be? Because I would make the argument that while Texas A&M has all of those resources, you have to ask the question why all of those great players aren't playing great.
Yeah.
And why all of those great players aren't performing to the level that every recruiting service and every other program that tried to recruit them that didn't sign them would have expected them to perform at to this level. And sometimes that could be the negative side of name, image, and likeness, pay for play, is motivation. And I think it's a fair question to ask, because when you have all those resources and you have everything in place, what's not working? And so you have to figure out, if you were a Lane Kiffin and there was that opportunity, could I make that work? Could I bridge that gap to get great players, but then get the great players to perform despite what's being provided for them?
Bo Knowles, Noles. I like that. Bo Knowles says you guys can stop wishing for a FSU loss. Florida lost their quarterback too. And that's something that hadn't been talked about a lot. Graham Mertz breaks a collarbone, we think, has a collarbone injury. He's likely out in that game. So it's going to be QB2 versus QB2 there in the Swamp this weekend. That helps Florida State a little bit, right?
I think it does, because Florida State's got the better top-to-bottom football team. And they've played with Tate Rodemaker as well. They've played games with him. They've actually won some big games. Remember 2 years ago they beat Louisville on the road when Jordan Travis got hurt. And so, I think it probably favors Florida State a little bit. And maybe I would say this. I would say the offense probably isn't as handcuffed at Florida State as maybe it will be at Florida.
By the way, if Florida loses that game, that would be 5 straight for the Gators to have lost. The buyout, if you're interested in that kind of stuff, for Billy Napier is $31.6 million. But they've got a top 5 recruiting class right now. And maybe it's just top 10 now. They've got a guy that's flipped, or a couple of guys who may be flipping. You don't pay somebody $31.6 million to walk away yet in Gainesville, do you?
I don't. I wouldn't. But that's what everybody seems to enjoy talking about, especially with that program.
Yeah.
But I think that's premature. But listen, as good of a guy as Sam Pittman is, and as much as we all love dealing with him, I think a lot of people are surprised that Arkansas is bringing Sam back. So, and Billy Napier is in far more of a, I would say, early infant stages of program development than Coach Pittman is.
We know at least one team is going to lose this week in the top 8 after 3 straight weeks with no chaos. Ohio State and Michigan plays each other. Let me read you these results. You tell me how many top 8 teams loses. We know either Ohio State, Michigan. Georgia's at Georgia Tech. Florida State's at Florida. Washington plays host to Wazoo, who just boat raced Colorado. Oregon plays host to Oregon State. Texas plays host to Texas Tech. Alabama's at Auburn. People keep waiting on chaos. Any chaos this week? We know one of them will lose. Is there a second or third loss there?
I think there could be potentially 3 chaotic games: Texas, Texas Tech, Oregon, Oregon State, Washington, Washington State. The problem is in order for that chaos to happen, none of those games are played on the road for those 3 teams. And I think that plays a role in all of it. I believe, and I've always felt this way, anytime you have a rivalry game at the end of the year, something that really means something to both teams, you're tired, you're worn out. One of the teams doesn't really have anything riding on it. The other team does. So Washington and Oregon have huge, huge ramifications riding on this. Texas has huge ramifications riding on this. Anything can happen. And that's what makes the weekend great, right? I mean, that's why we're all sitting here talking about it and looking forward to these matchups. It's going to be so much fun.
Yeah, 2 of them happen on a Friday, by the way. Texas Tech and Texas, 6:30 on ABC.
That's my game.
That's your game, isn't it? That's what I was going to get to.
Yeah.
So you're back in Austin.
Yeah, the official broadcast television provider of Texas Longhorn football is Tom Luganville, Dusty Voracek, and Dave Pasch.
Hey, but it's been interesting in the second half, every one of those, hasn't it?
Oh, no doubt. I mean, I will say this about Sark's team. They have come up with ways to finish, and they've come up with ways to win in different fashion. And in fairness, you could make the argument that is something that team has failed miserably at in years past. And credit those kids and that football team, because I know culture is an overused phrase in this business, but there's something going on in that locker room at Texas. That's a very galvanized unit.
All right, Tom Luginbill, man, have a happy Thanksgiving. You'll obviously be on the road for your Thanksgiving to Austin there. Hope you and your family.
Yeah.
Congratulations to your son. I actually taught a class at Eastern Kentucky when I worked in Lexington. Yeah, broadcasting class. It was for football players to make an A, so I wish I was still there. I'd give him an A. So it was great. Luginbill back with us next Monday. Couple more Monday morning lives this football season. Thanks for being with us. Brought to you by MyBookie.ag. MyBookie.ag, promo code next round. Other than Texas Tech, Texas with Lugs on Friday night. You get Oregon State, Oregon, 7:30 on Fox. That impacts the playoffs. And then we go into Saturday's rivalry weekend. Should be a lot of fun. Don't forget the next round. The boys join me coming up at 9 a.m. Central Time in about an hour. If you want us on the replay, it starts right here at the top of the hour. Until next time, happy Thanksgiving, everybody. God bless you and God bless America.